Welcome back to Alpha to Omega. Today we'll be talking about what makes an author an author. So let's get right into it. Why must there be an author? As we talked about previously, we can think of the universe as a book, in that particles are like letters, and those particles can form together to form the innumerable words that we experience in our day-to-day lives. For example, the sun, which can be thought of as a collection of particles, is a word, as is the moon, as is the stars, as is everything else around us, including you and me. We are all essentially words because we are all formed of particles. And those particles, when they do come together, have something meaningful within them that we can all appreciate. In other words, we can all read the universe, just like a book. The question, though, is that universe, just like a book, must have an author to give itself being at every moment. Who must that author be? We are either left with one of two choices. Either the universe and everything it contains, and therefore all the number of particles it contains, are writing themselves into being at every moment, and therefore what that implies is that those particles know how to form together with other particles into words and are aware of the structure of the universe, or if we think about it, the grammar, such that things can be meaningfully conveyed to us. Either they know those things and therefore are the authors of themselves, or there must be an author beyond their own nature, in other words, beyond the nature of the material world. And as we talked about previously, that author must, and I emphasize must because it is a conclusion, a rational conclusion, that author must be beyond the nature of the material world. Because if we examine particles in this world, we realize there is nothing inherent in them that necessitates that they form words at all. They don't have any knowledge or any power or any will or any wisdom to state that we are going to come together and form meaningful things in the world that human beings can appreciate and understand. Simply put, for example, if I look at myself and I look at, my hands or my eyes or my nose or my ears or my mouth, they're all particles. They're all a collection of particles, flesh and bones as is commonly referred to. And yet, those things can appreciate external stimuli. They can touch, they can taste, they can smell, they can hear, they can see, and yet there's nothing inherent in those things that necessitates any of those qualities that make a human being a human being. Likewise, if we look at the sun, it's just a bunch of particles that come together to form the sun. But there is nothing inherent in the sun that necessitates that it must give off heat and therefore be a component that is necessary for life on Earth. Likewise, the moon, or likewise water, or likewise soil, or likewise all the other plants and animals around us. The same can be said of a book, a physical book that is, that we would read. When we open up that book, we see that there's ink on a page, and that ink doesn't really know anything about what meaning is, and yet it is there, and there are words there, letters and words, and sentences and paragraphs and chapters that form a meaningful, comprehensible book. But we cannot find the author in that book. What's implied is that the author must be beyond the nature of that book, and in a sense, we are communicating with the author through their work at that very moment. What we're really saying then is there can't be anything other than authorship. And we can only have one of two positions. Either we state things are authoring themselves into being, or what is really the case, that there must be an author beyond the nature of the world. And what that author does, what makes that author an author, is that they are bringing something into being from a state of complete non-being. In other words, just like an author of a book, before the book was written, there was no book to speak of. And yet that author brought that book into being so that it could be read and appreciated and that it could be communicated with by the reader to them. Likewise, the book of the universe at every moment isn't existent. And yet at every moment it is coming into being so that we can appreciate it, we can read it, and we can communicate with the author through it. What does reading the book of the universe mean? When we live our day-to-day lives, what we're really doing is experiencing the book of the universe. The question, though, is, are we cognizant that we're not just simply experiencing it, But it is through that experience we can communicate with the author of this book of the universe. And that's what's really taking place, is that we are communicating with that author if we're aware of it. For example, if we take a sunny day and we appreciate the beauty and the wisdom within it, we can see that it's the author that must have made that sunny day possible, made it into being, gave it a sort of reality, brought letters into being, and arranged those letters, or particles really, in such a way that beauty manifests, or wisdom manifests, or structure or order manifests. All things that must take place are taking place for just that one moment in which the sun peeks out through the clouds and we can appreciate it. The question though is, are we aware that we're really communicating with the author through that experience? And likewise, the author is communicating with us. By being aware of that, we can have a conversation with the author of this universe. And not an author that we don't know who they must be, but rather an author in which we know who they must be through the qualities that reflect in this world. As I mentioned before, the knowledge that's present in this world. In other words, the things that are the knowledge that must be necessary to bring one moment into being, one page of the world into being. The power to do so, the will to do so, the beauty that manifests, the wisdom, the structure, the order, the arrangement, all those things that are taking place at any given moment, we can appreciate them and direct our appreciation and our gratitude and our thanks towards that author, because the author is communicating through those moments who they must be. In other words, the meaning of life, and really the reality of life, is such that we go through this world experiencing things. And just like a book, we can use those experiences to communicate with the author. We can read a certain page of this universe in our own life, that's a brief moment in the history of time, and we can see who that author must be and direct any sort of emotional response we may have towards that author. Thanks, gratitude, appreciation, concern, and possibly even displeasure or anger even. But the key thing to do is to not see the book of the universe, and really any book for that matter, as being in and of itself for itself. In other words, it doesn't have an author. If we just go through life and say, I'm going to experience things for the sake of experiencing things, then it's really defeating the purpose of what a book is and must be, and what its essential purpose is. We must all become readers, and not just readers of anything, but the readers of this book that we are experiencing. The book's effect on us. So just as we are communicating with the author, and the author is making himself known through this book of the universe, it's also shaping who we are as human beings. Just like if I open up a book, it will not only tell me about who the author must be, what their thoughts and ideas must be, but it also shapes who I am as a person, what I may do in the future, or how I may think or feel or respond in certain circumstances. Likewise, this book of the universe is also shaping who we are as human beings. In other words, the author is trying to educate us, not only on who they must be, but in reality, who we are as human beings. In that, when I do appreciate something beautiful, or something wise, or something just, that's not only saying something about the author. What it's really saying then is something also about myself, in that I appreciate those things, and I love those things, and I want those things to be manifest. And the only thing I can do, if I desire those things to be, those things to happen, to surround me and be a part of my experience in this day-to-day life of mine, then I must direct that concern and that plea towards the author himself. In other words, I can't ask the sun to rise up every day in the east so that I can bask and bathe in its warmth, and that life can actually take place, and that the plants can grow, and therefore the animals can eat, and therefore I can eat. No, I can't ask the sun that, because the sun doesn't know anything about how I feel, or what I care about, or what I want. Really, I can ask the author through that sun and say, I desire for the sun to rise up in the east because you have made me in such a way. You have authored me in such a way to appreciate it. And only you can bring about its being in such a way in which I appreciate it. Because if there was no sun, if the sun didn't happen to rise in the east and set in the west, then I would be in a state of despair. And I can't say that the sun has anything to do with it. I can't ask the sun to heed my call. The only one I can ask is the one who must have authored the sun into being in such a way in which I desire it to act in the way I want it to. What I'm really trying to say then is that I must direct what my concerns are and how I behave in this world. Not just simply my actions, but what my viewpoint of the world is towards the author himself by reading the book. Not reading the book and asking the book to provide for me, but reading the book and looking towards the author and saying, can you provide more through this book? Because if I misdirect my concern or my aim towards the book itself, then I'm missing the point of what these things are doing. They're just means of communication. Just like when I open up a physical book, the letters and the words in and of themselves don't mean anything except for the fact that the author has imprinted what he desires it to mean on those words. And so the letters and words can't aid me, but rather the author can. It's the author that's coming to my assistance. It's the author that's helping me. It's the author that's shaping who I am as a human being, not the letters and the words. They have nothing in and of themselves to do with it. They are just simply the conduit, the means, the mechanism. And you may ask the question, how do I know how the author wants to shape me or what the author desires of me? What the author asks of me? Well, that's a conversation for another video. But simply put, the author is educating. That's what a book does. It educates, it informs. It tells me something I may not myself be aware of, and makes me cognizant of it so that I can reflect and ponder upon it and potentially do something with it. That is the essence of the Book of the Universe. That it not only tells me something about who the author must be, but therefore it's also telling me something about who I am, and vice versa. How to read this book. So you may be thinking, how do I know how to read the Book of the Universe? What are its parameters? Because as we mentioned previously, two people can read something meaningful and take two very different things from it. How do I know what my response should be? How do I know what I should do with what I'm reading? That is a larger question that I think we need to explore in future videos, because how we interpret the world, the lens through which we read it, or the parameters which we use in order to understand it, shapes who we are as human beings, what we do. It informs our actions, and not just our actions, how we perceive the world, what we think of it, and what our emotional response is through our day-to-day experiences. I'll leave you all with that to think about. What the structure must be in how we interpret the world and what we do with it. And until then, think about it. And I'll see you guys next time.